When my father sold my grandfather's Navy watch, he didn't even flinch. He just said, "Your brother's wedding matters more than a piece of old metal." My name is Kylie Mitchell, and that watch wasn't just metal. It was the only thing left of a man who taught me what honor meant, and the only proof that our family ever had a soul. That night, I stood in silence, realizing my father hadn't just sold a watch, he'd sold our legacy. A week later, the antique dealer called. "Ms. Mitchell, we found something hidden inside your grandfather's watch. You need to come." That's when I understood. The truth my family buried wasn't gone. It was waiting for me to dig it up. The scent of salt and steel still clung to me as I crossed the Chesapeake that Friday morning. The closer I got to Portsmouth, the heavier the air felt, thick with memories I hadn't asked to remember. The Mitchell house stood the same as always, white shutters, trimmed hedges, a flag still folded in its glass case, but something inside had shifted. The silence had weight now. I walked through the living room, where my grandfather's photographs still watched over us in uniformed stillness. His medals gleamed in their frame. His folded flag lay untouched, yet on the shelf beneath them, a space gaped empty, where his silver Navy watch used to be. I found my father in his study, sunlight cutting across the desk piled with papers and a half-finished drink. "It's gone," I said quietly. He didn't even look up. "What is?" "Grandpa's watch," he exhaled, impatient. "Your brother needed help for the wedding. I sold it. Family first, right?" For a moment, all I could hear was the wind outside tapping against the window pane. Family first. The words stung worse than any insult. Since when did family mean sacrificing the one thing that held us together? He kept talking, his tone flat, rehearsed. "It was just sitting there collecting dust. Better it helps Bryce start his life than sit on a shelf." I didn't answer. In my mind, I saw my grandfather's face, stern yet kind, the way he'd once knelt beside me and said honor wasn't something you framed on a wall. It was something you lived when no one was watching. That night, as I packed my suitcase, my mother appeared in the doorway. "Your father thought it was the right thing," she whispered. I looked up, tired. "Then he's forgotten what right means." A week later, while inspecting a ship at the dockyard, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, older. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Harold Gant from Charleston Antique Dealers. We found something inside your grandfather's watch. You need to come immediately." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Somewhere beyond the static and the crash of the waves, I swore I could hear it. The faint, steady tick of a silver watch calling me back to the truth my family tried to sell away. The drive to Charleston ran along the edge of the bay, the sunlight turning the water into sheets of liquid silver. I hadn't taken this road in years, but I remembered how my grandfather used to drive it in silence, his thumb tapping gently against his old watch, as if keeping rhythm with the sea. The shop sat near the docks, tucked between a row of weathered brick buildings. The sign, Harold's Maritime Antiques, swung softly in the wind, the paint fading like an old photograph. Inside smelled of oak and metal, time preserved in dust and brass. The owner, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, shook my hand with a steady grip before lifting a small velvet box onto the counter. It was there, the watch, gleaming as though untouched by anyone since the day it left my grandfather's hands. The light hit its surface, scattering across the glass like sunlight on water. When the man turned the back open, something thin slipped free and floated to the counter. A small piece of aged parchment. The handwriting stopped my breath. Precise, familiar, and deliberate. If sold, return to K. M. For the sea remembers. K. M. My initials. My throat tightened. Whoever my grandfather had been to the world, to me, he was a man who planned even for betrayal. The shopkeeper leaned in, studying the words, folded right between the plates. He murmured, "A careful man, whoever he was. I nodded, barely able to speak. Inside the casing lay a tiny folded map, the paper frayed at the edges, marked with fading red ink, Cape Charles Dockyard. My fingers trembled. That was where he'd been stationed after retirement. The shopkeeper tilted his head. You think he hid something? I shook mine slowly. No, he saved something. The room seemed to shrink around me as I stared at the map. Whatever he'd left behind wasn't just for me. It was his way of making sure the truth stayed afloat, waiting for someone who still believed in what he did. That night, the moonlight stretched through the window of my grandfather's old study, cutting across the oak desk like a blade. Dust covered everything except the carved initials on the corner. R.M. I ran my fingers over them, tracing the grooves as if they might still be warm. One drawer stuck halfway, its handle stiff from years of silence. Inside lay a sealed envelope, the wax dark green and unbroken. Across the front, written in his neat, unwavering script, if they ever forget what the sea taught us, follow the tide north. I hesitated, then broke the seal. A single paper inside bore a military code, OHL 85, Operation Harbor Light. At the bottom, another line in ink that had bled slightly with age. Not all battles end at sea. My heart hammered. Operation Harbor Light, an aid mission I'd only heard whispers about, quietly shut down in the late 80s. He'd commanded it, but no one in the family ever spoke of it again. The door creaked. My father appeared in the doorway, a glass of whiskey in his hand, eyes shadowed by lamplight. Digging for ghosts again? He asked, his tone casual, almost bored. I kept my eyes on the letter. I'm trying to understand him. He snorted softly. He was a good man, just naive, always trying to save people who gave nothing back. Maybe if he'd looked after his own, things would have turned out better. I met his gaze, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. He saved our name. You're the one spending it. A dry laugh, a shake of his head, and he turned away. When the door closed, the silence roared louder than before. I opened the drawer again and found one more item pressed against the wood, a faded coordinate card stamped with naval insignia. The numbers matched the markings on the Charleston map. Everything pointed north, to Cape Charles Dockyard. And in that quiet room, I felt the faint echo of a command still waiting to be obeyed. The sky over Portsmouth hung low, gray and restless, as if the sea itself were hiding a secret. I met Lieutenant Dana Reeves at the naval base, her fingers already tapping across the keyboard before I'd even sat down. Lines of text scrolled until one line flashed red. Classified, suspended, 1986, due to financial irregularities. She turned the screen toward me. Two names appeared side by side, Admiral Robert Mitchell, Command, and Thomas Mitchell, Finance. My pulse slowed. My father had handled the money. When I asked why it was suspended, Dana hesitated, saying there were claims of misuse, but the report was sealed. I stared at the date, 1986. The year my grandfather's name vanished from the papers. The year silence became a family tradition. That evening, the kitchen light felt too bright, too warm for the things we weren't saying. My father spoke proudly about Bryce and the senator's reception, his voice thick with satisfaction. I asked if he was proud. He said he was, because Bryce did something visible. I told him visibility wasn't worth much if you had to step on someone's legacy to get it. He smiled without humor. At least people know his name, he said. Grandpa's was known too, until you erased it. I shot back. The air snapped. He set his glass down hard, eyes narrowing. Be careful what you're digging for, Kylie. Some ghosts don't want to be found. I held his gaze. The dead don't hide, Dad. The guilty do, later. I sat alone in the garage. The air cold, the silence dense. The space where my grandfather's car once stood felt like a wound. I turned the silver watch in my hand, listening to its steady tick echo through the dark, like a heartbeat that refused to die. The road to Cape Charles twisted along the bay, the fog low and silver. The dockyard was nearly gone, just broken planks and an old warehouse leaning toward the tide. I stepped inside, the flashlight cutting through dust and salt. Under the floorboards, metal caught the beam, an engraved navy plate marked Relief Division, Blue Tide. I pried it open. Beneath lay a sealed steel box, rusted but intact. The key from my grandfather's watch fit the latch perfectly. Inside, a leather journal, letters yellowed by salt air, and lists of quiet generosity, rent paid, limbs repaired, lives saved. At the end, one final name, Captain Ezra Cole. Beside it, a note in my grandfather's handwriting. If I can't deliver this, she will. I searched his name. The first result, missing in action, 1985. The second, retired. Key Largo, Florida. He was alive. I stood on the dock, the tide brushing against my boots, the night alive with the hum of wind and water. My grandfather hadn't left behind a mystery. He'd left a mission. The sea whispered around me, steady and knowing. The sea remembers. Florida spread out below the plain like broken glass scattered across a turquoise mirror. The islands glittered under the sun, calm and endless, but my chest was tight. The blue tide box and the letter marked, "Deliver to Captain Ezra Cole," sat heavy in my bag, the weight of my grandfather's unfinished truth pressing against me. His cabin stood at the edge of the sand, surrounded by palm shadows and the hush of the tide. When the door opened, a tall, thin man with white hair and ocean-gray eyes studied me for a moment before nodding. "You must be Robert's granddaughter. He told me you'd come if something went wrong." We sat on the porch overlooking the surf, the air tasting of salt and memory. Ezra spoke of Blue Tide, the relief division that had helped veterans after the hurricane, long after the Navy withdrew support. He said my grandfather used his pension to fund it himself, until the Navy shut it down. Then he paused. "Your father was assigned to manage the funds. He leaked the donor list to private contractors. They threatened lawsuits. Robert took the blame to protect him." My pulse thudded painfully. He covered for my father? Ezra's eyes softened. He loved his son, but it broke him. He died ashamed that doing right cost him his name. I opened the box and showed him the Blue Tide insignia. His voice trembled. "He saved my life once, pulled me from a sinking patrol boat. I owed him everything. You," he said, "carry his fire." He disappeared inside, returning with a tiny plastic pouch. Inside was a microchip. "These are the original records. Every letter, every dollar. Show them, and they'll know who truly ran Blue Tide." I gripped it hard. "This could clear his name, or destroy your father's," he said quietly. "Truth doesn't pick favorites. It just floats." That night, I sat in my hotel room, the ocean murmuring through the open window. On the screen, the words glowed. "Unauthorized disclosure, Thomas Mitchell, 1986. My chest burned. My grandfather had sacrificed his honor to protect blood. My father had sacrificed truth to protect his pride. Outside, the waves struck the rocks with a rhythm steady as breath. "Honor doesn't shout," I heard him say again. "It endures." When I returned to Virginia, the house gleamed with pretense, chandeliers, fresh flowers, laughter that didn't reach the eyes. The Chesapeake Resort glittered that evening, guests, cameras, senators. My father wore his favorite Navy suit, my grandfather's medal pinned over his heart. I stopped near the entrance. His smile stiffened. "You're early. Maybe you can behave this time." My gaze dropped to the medal. "You're wearing his honor." He shrugged. "It's family." "Then act like it," I said quietly. Bryce stepped between us. "Ever the peacemaker. Don't start. Kylie, this day isn't about you." I smiled faintly. "No, it's about the man who bought his legacy." Later, I sat alone in my car outside the resort, the bay glowing with gold reflections. The watch and microchip lay on the seat beside me. My phone rang, Dana's voice urgent. "Someone accessed your account from the old Harbor Light server. The data's being traced. If you don't release it, it's gone." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I could keep silent, protect my father, and let my grandfather's name stay buried. Or I could tell the truth and destroy what was left of our family. I looked at the lights dancing on the water. If they forget what the sea taught us, I whispered, the tide will remind them. Morning broke clean and bright. I entered the wedding in full naval dress blues, the silver watch clipped to my chest. As I walked through the crowd, the laughter faltered. My father froze beside the senator, fear flashing beneath his polished smile. I didn't speak. My hand brushed the watch, feeling its steady tick, his voice, his courage, beating with my own. The Chesapeake Bay Resort gleamed under strings of gold light, banners fluttering, champagne sparkling like liquid pride. Guests filled the hall, politicians, business elites, every name my father had ever wanted to impress. I stood at the entrance in full navy dress blues, the silver watch clipped to my chest, a heartbeat against my uniform. The room fell silent as I walked in. My mother froze mid-smile, Bryce's face twisted with panic. My father, beside the senator, forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Not now, Kylie, he murmured. I met his stare. Now's perfect. The MC raised a glass. Let's toast to the Mitchell legacy, 3 generations of honor and service. My father lifted his champagne, voice firm and proud, to family, to legacy, to the Mitchell name. I stepped forward. That name doesn't mean what you think it does. A few nervous laughs scattered through the crowd. I set the silver watch on the table under the golden light. You sold this, Dad. But you didn't just sell silver. You sold gold, his gold. He stiffened. This isn't the time. It's the only time. I opened my laptop. The projection lit the wall. Relief Division, Blue Tide. Names glowed. Admiral Robert Mitchell, Commander, Thomas Mitchell, Financial Lead. My voice stayed calm, slicing through the hush. In 1986, Blue Tide was shut down because someone leaked classified files. The Navy blamed my grandfather. But the leak came from inside. From you, my father shouted, voice cracking. That's a lie. I opened another document. His signed authorization. The crowd turned, the weight of truth closing in. You said you did it for family, I said quietly, but he took the fall so you could keep your reputation. An elderly veteran rose slowly from his seat. Admiral Robert Mitchell. He saved my brother in 1983. He raised his hand in a military salute. One by one, others followed. The hall filled with a silence so pure it hurt. My father's head bowed. Bryce looked down. I stood still, the light catching the watch over my heart. You didn't just sell his watch, Dad. You sold his oath. But I'm here to buy it back, with truth. The ticking of the silver watch was the only sound left. Honor had finally spoken. 2 weeks after the wedding, headlines rippled through Portsmouth like a tide returning to shore. Navy reviewing forgotten relief program. I sat across from Dana Reeves inside the Department of the Navy. The walls lined with flags and silence. The microchip from Captain Cole had been verified. Every record authenticated. Every name restored. The new report read, Admiral Robert Mitchell acted with personal funds and integrity. Operation Blue Tide is reinstated in Navy archives. My hands trembled as I traced the printed words. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the ocean finally exhaling after decades of holding its breath. A month later, the Navy Museum in Portsmouth unveiled a new exhibit, The Quiet Tide. A brass plaque gleamed beneath the lights, for those who served without asking to be remembered. Behind the glass case sat my grandfather's silver watch, its face bright under the reflection of the flag. The inscription below read, Property of Admiral Robert Mitchell, returned by his granddaughter. Kylie. My father came alone. No suit, no crowd. Just a man stripped of armor. He stood before the display, eyes glistening. It's still ticking, he said quietly. I nodded. So does honor. For a long time, neither of us spoke. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not. I answered. But you can start earning it. Bryce approached then, voice low, breaking the stillness. I'm sorry, Kylie. I didn't look at him. My palm rested against the glass, feeling the faint rhythm beneath, tick by steady tick, the sound of a man's heart still guarding those who finally learned the weight of truth. Dawn spilled across Cape Charles, soft and silver, the water glittering like molten glass. I stood on the pier where everything had begun, the air carrying the scent of salt and memory. Waves lapped against the pilings with a patient rhythm, steady as breath. Around my neck hung the key from my grandfather's watch. I opened his old notebook and wrote the final line beneath his faded words. Mission complete. The tide remembers. Closing it. I placed the book in a small wooden box and set it beneath the railing, exactly where he once stood, watching the horizon in silence. Footsteps approached from behind. My father walked slowly toward me, a bouquet of white flowers trembling in his hands. He laid them down beside the box and raised his hand in a quiet salute. I returned it, neither of us needing to speak. The sea answered for us. You didn't die with the sea, Grandpa, I whispered. You became it, somewhere far away. The silver watch kept ticking, but its rhythm now lived inside my chest, beating with the sound of the tide, 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 the sound of